Welcome back to another episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and today we're diving into what it's really like to work in the ocean as part of our monthly series called Surfacing Secrets. Explore the ocean, know the planet. Have you ever wondered what it takes to explore the deep sea? Operate cutting-edge underwater technology or spend your days surrounded by one of the planet's mysterious environments? In this episode, I'm joined by Megan Paulson and Dirk from Oceans Network Canada and Josh Tedarenko from Campac, who share their first-hand experiences working in the field. We talk about everything from excitement of deploying ROVs thousands of meters below the surface to the challenges of working under intense pressure, both literal and figurative. If you ever dreamed of a career in marine exploration and engineering, or you want to understand what life is like for those protecting and studying our oceans, this is the episode for you. Let's start the show.
And then on the flip side, there's days where you're like, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this right now. This is absolutely incredible.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking about the deep sea. We're going to be talking about the work done by people and partners of Ocean Networks Canada, and we're going to be going beyond the surface to talk about what it really means to work in the ocean, especially in the mysterious and challenging world of the deep sea. Our guests, Megan, Josh, and Dirk, are ocean professionals who spend their days deploying and maintaining remotely operated vehicles, troubleshooting problems miles offshore, and gathering crucial data for ocean science. We'll hear what it feels like to operate equipment under extreme pressure, the surprises you can encounter when exploring the ocean floor, and the teamwork it takes to make every mission a success. We're also going to dig into the personal side of life at sea, how they balance long stints away from family, the camaraderie that develops among crew members, and the passion that keeps them coming back to this vital and demanding work. This conversation is a rare behind-the-scenes look at careers that keep our understanding of the ocean moving forward, and it's a chance to appreciate the people who dedicate their lives to studying and protecting ocean ecosystems. So stay tuned, get ready for the stories from the deep, and let's get to know the planet on Surfacing Secrets. Here's the interview with Megan, Josh, and Dirk. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Megan, Josh, and Dirk, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about what it's like to work in the ocean?
Let's do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm super excited because it's not often, actually, I don't think we've ever really had a full conversation of what it's like to work in the ocean, especially the deep sea. We have three people here who work in partnership with Josh and for Oceans Network Canada with Megan and Dirk, and we're going to find out exactly what they do with those programs. But we are here to talk about what it's like to work in the ocean because that is what they do, and we're going to talk about sort of the challenges, the fun that you get to have out there, but also just like what it's like to work like in such a deep pressured system and all the materials that have to go in, ROVs. There's going to be a lot of fun chats coming on this podcast on this episode. So I am super excited to do that. Before we get into all of that, though, why don't we hear from all of you of who you are and what you do? We'll start with Megan.
Thanks, Andrew. My name is Megan Paulson, and my role here at Ocean Networks Canada is Executive Director of Observatory Operations. And what that means is basically all operations at ONC as it relates to our observatories is under my purview, and that includes physical operations and digital operations, because what we do, we don't just put stuff in the ocean, but we collect data from everything that we're putting in the ocean, and we make that data available to basically anyone with an internet connection for free.
That's amazing. I love that. I can't wait to dive deep into that. Let's go Josh next.
Yeah, I'm Josh Tedarenko. I'm Director of ROV Operations at Campac Marine Services. We're a company on the west coast of Canada that provides any subsea services down to 6,000 meters with our deep sea rated ROV. My job in the company is to take care of and run and operate, mobilize, upgrade all of our underwater robotic systems.
Okay, that's interesting. I feel like that is a continually growing field to look at robotics, and especially when it comes to underwater work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, just like any tech industry, you're always sort of chasing the newest, latest technology and trying to be at the forefront. And a lot of what our partnership is with Ocean Networks Canada is not just to provide the services, but also to make sure that we stay on top of the latest and greatest technology for the industry. So.
Absolutely. Looking forward to diving into that as well. And Dirk, how about you let us know who you are and what you do?
Okay, I'm Dirk Brusso. I'm the Director of Observatory Physical Operations for Ocean Networks Canada. And my team is made up of engineers and technicians, and we work together to integrate new physical infrastructure onto the network, whether that's new sensors, new equipment, or new technology, stuff like that.
Nice. Very nice. This is going to be a lot of fun to be able to talk to you. I want to just start right from the beginning, before all of you got to where you were. And Megan, we'll start with you. What was it like for you to get into the ocean? What made you want to work in the ocean?
It's a great question. So I grew up on the east coast of Canada, very ocean-friendly place. But it wasn't really until I was an undergraduate student in engineering in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I applied for a position for the Geological Survey of Canada, and fortunately got the position in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and had the opportunity through my supervisor to do an offshore expedition where we were collecting sediment cores, and absolutely fell in love with it. I was absolutely hooked, to the point where when I graduated my undergrad, my main criteria for getting a job was I needed to work offshore.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Quick question here. When you work, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but when you work at sea, there's a lot of sacrifices you have to make. It's not a regular, what we, quote unquote, what people would consider a regular land job where you get to go home after your 9 to 5. You're at sea. What was so appealing for you about working at sea?
Part of it was the adventure of it. I mean, you get to go to places that very few people go to. Part of it was the food. I like being fed. The food is usually amazing. I like it when people make food for me.
Yeah.
And part of it was really getting to know the people on board. It's such a different environment than a regular office environment. And you're meeting people and you're working really closely with people that you wouldn't normally do so, from every walk of life, from every type of education level. And it's really a fascinating sort of microcosm environment. And you're kind of stuck together. So whatever comes up, you have to figure it out. You have to work it out, and you have to move forward for the very, focused reason that you're out there, for whatever your mission is at the time.
Yeah, for sure. And I find too, I've had experience working at sea, and I find when you have to work through those problems, you're able to get it. It's a complete confidence boost when you're able to figure it out, however long it takes. You never know when an instrument's not going to work or something's not going to work. And if you're able to get it going, that's probably one of the best feelings.
It's such a rush, because sometimes things break. Sometimes you have to get really creative.
Yeah.
And when you're able to work through as a team and troubleshoot and put something together to solve whatever the issue was, and it works, you turn it on, it works, or whatever it is, it's infectious.
Absolutely. And speaking of, fixing things at sea, Josh, you're into robotics. I'm sure you've come across that quite a bit. But what got you into this company that you're working at? What were you doing beforehand? Was this always the plan when you were younger? How did this all come to be?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, no, I've never had to fix a robot offshore. They always work perfectly, no matter what. Never experienced that once. No, we're fixing them all the time. So I was fortunate enough to grow up with a dad that he was in the field for his career. So I kind of grew up around it, and we spent time on the ocean, privately, and then I got to see some pretty cool ships when I was young. I always wanted to be a pilot, though, an aircraft pilot, but eventually I was an electrician. After high school, I did a trade, and then really why I went into subsea robotics is the challenge. Subsea robotics is especially deep sea is one of the most challenging jobs, careers on the planet, in my opinion. Intellectually, just the problems that you have to solve offshore, and the teamwork needed to solve them consistently drew me into working offshore. That's really the main reason why I love it every day. I love the food more than Megan. I'll tell you. I love the getting a team together on the ship, and just like we talked about, you all have to come together to solve things. Whether it's subsea or fixing something on the surface so they can get back in the water. But the real draw for me is that you are always learning. You're always being challenged. There's always something different, especially working with Ocean Networks Canada or in the science field, because you're always just pushing to do new things. It's not like more common ROV fields and oil and gas and things. They've kind of got everything figured out, and they've been doing it for a long time. But in the fields that we work in, it's exploration and just you're always trying to solve an issue with people that really, really want to solve it with you, that are really interested. Everybody's very motivated when we all come together offshore. So that's the main draw for me. That's why I got into this.
I don't blame you. That sounds amazing. Dirk, how about yourself?
When growing up, I grew up in a kind of a subtropical rainforest in South Africa, and at the age of 6, I already had my own horse, and we would ride our horses in the game reserves and stuff to my friend's house. We were pretty wild kids, right? So I've always had this sense of adventure, and I think that just kind of came stuck along when I was in university and got opportunity to do a co-op with Ocean Networks Canada. You saw the same thing. It's you get to go all these places, kind of what Megan was saying. We've got observatories in the Arctic, all along the coast of BC. We got them on the East Coast. So it's a lot of really remote travel, and that's what I really liked. And then working here, I kind of got into the offshore, working on the vessels and stuff. That's just part of the job, right? So and I guess one of my favorite things about working here is everyone kind of circled. I want to say circled the train, but everyone kind of came together because they're equally passionate. So the people you're working with are just as excited. And I think both Josh and Megan already mentioned this, but you kind of end up here because you want to be here. It's not necessarily an easy road to get here. So coworkers, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too how a lot of people. I'm a marine biologist, and I think a lot of people who try and get into this field who want to work on the ocean think they have to be a marine biologist. You are all scientists. You are all engineers of one way or another, or have worked in that field. Did you ever picture yourself, Dirk or Josh? You might be a little different because your dad worked in this, and this is something that was you could see what was one of the potentials other than being a pilot. But did any of you think that this is what you were going to be doing? Dirk, we'll start with you this time. Did you think that you will be working on the ocean you're a mechanical engineer, right?
Mechanical engineer, yeah.
Yeah. So, did you ever think that was one of the things you're going to be doing?
No, not at all. I've always loved fishing, and I like being on the ocean and stuff like that. But I never thought I'd work in the ocean. Initially, I was an aspiring geologist. My first crack at trying to get a degree, and that did not work out. So, kind of went back square one, did electrical apprenticeship, or started that, and then went to UVic for marine biology. Kind of left that as well, and then eventually did my engineering degree, and still ended up kind of where in the field work kind of thing. So long track, but. Yeah, love it. And Josh, I know you kind of worked in that you saw what it was like, but did you ever picture this is what you were going to be doing, or I know you said you wanted to be a pilot, but was this always something you wanted to do?
Yeah, no, I didn't really consider this until my mid 20s, to be honest. I knew it was an opportunity that I could probably take up, but and then once I got into it, I was basically thrown right in. I took the job, and then we had our first cruise for ONC in 2012 or 13. I can't remember. And we were kind of as a short notice thing, and we got thrown on board a ship, and I just never turned back. I didn't really think that I would work offshore. I love spending time in the ocean. either way, but
Yeah.
didn't expect this.
No, absolutely. And Megan, how about yourself?
Well, it's funny that you said most people think you need to be a marine biologist to get into this field. And these guys can attest, I'm a terrible biologist. I'm terrible at identifying anything, right. I call them all critters and all
critters,
fish.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, when I went to university, I started in science until I thought I was going to major in chemistry until I hit organic chemistry. And I thought, no, thank you.
That'll do that to you.
And then I switched to engineering and ended up going into civil engineering. So again, you don't think of civil engineering and working on the ocean at all. But it was really the co-op work term where I got the opportunity to do ocean work where like that was it. I was done. So
yeah.
This is it. I love the field work. I love the environment. I love the working with the technology. I love just the fact that you have to be self-reliant. You can't just, when you're out there, you can't just swing by the ocean hardware store to pick up anything you forgot.
A lot of people in my industry, at least, they say, you fall into it. You get a
that's exactly right. Yeah.
In robotics or a background in marine biology, there's so many different backgrounds that you can actually get into. Engineering, it's not just limited to marine biology or what people might think. And then you kind of get an opportunity at some point, and then a lot of people fall in love with it, just like we all have. But we say it all the time. How did you get into this? And I kind of just fell into it.
Yeah,
that's 100% right, Josh. Yeah, I certainly did.
Yeah. Well, and Megan, I wanted to just kind of ask a question too. Obviously, being the woman on the podcast today, working in a field at sea is not something that I think we see it a little bit. We see it more today than we did, a few decades ago. But it's not something that is advertised, or not a lot of young girls are going to say, "I'm going to work at sea." Back when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, although I did see a lot of women in my class, like in my marine biology class anyway, and there's more and more engineers coming through that are females. What was it? What have you found the difference when you first started to now? Like, what's been that? Do you find you're seeing more women working in the field? And when you first started, like, how was that for you?
Yeah, definitely. So, and it kind of depends on the industry that you're working in. I find working in science, there tends to be more women and more women working in the field.
Right.
Just kind of a friendlier environment.
Yeah.
I didn't always work in science, and it wasn't always quite as friendly. But certainly the number of women who are going into the field has increased. And I think the overall sort of expectations and acceptance of women being in the field has really grown a lot. It used to be, at times, like I wouldn't be allowed to go out on a ship because there wasn't accommodations.
Yeah.
And these guys know very well that at Ocean Networks Canada, that's not an acceptable answer now.
Right.
We have to make sure that the accommodations are there. And I think having a generation or a couple of generations of women who've kind of gone through it and are in leadership positions now, saying like, no, that's not acceptable, we have to do better, is really push things forward. We were offshore just this past June, and there were a number of young women, or younger than me, I should say, women on board, where it was their first experience at sea, and it was such a open and friendly and supportive environment that was different than when I started, for sure. And one of the other senior women on board, we just kind of looked at each other and said to each other, like, wow, can you imagine if this is what your first experience at sea was like? It was so great to see.
Yeah, and obviously having such a positive experience for young scientists, any young scientists come out, will want them to come back out. It'll allow them to be like, yeah, that was so much fun. I want to go back out and do it again. Let's be honest, it's not easy to work in the ocean. We say it's fun, but there's some tough days. You know, when the seas are up and it's not always calm and it's not always sunny, and so it can be quite difficult sometimes. So it's always good to have a great crew. And as we start to, the questions are going to start to get into the formal of like, what types of jobs are you guys doing when you're out there? That having that crew dynamic where everybody gets along, and works together and are supportive together. Obviously, the three of you know each other quite well. You've been at sea quite a number of times. Dirk, what makes a crew like? What makes it like in terms of the people work so well together? Like, what does it take, especially at sea?
Well, there's it's kind of funny. You pick a crew, or you pick your crew list, very specific to what the jobs are, and there's kind of these kind of discrete jobs. Mm-hmm. And then so you've got the kind of the specialist for each one, and then you also have these like, I don't know, jack of all trade, but Swiss Army knives of people that you can bring along as well. So that kind of cover the spread. So we've got a few of those as well. So we'll have like a dedicated person from science or data that would focus a lot of their efforts on that field because it takes like their full attention. But then there's also the back deck work and leading dives and that kind of thing that you really need to shuffle the expertise around. But I think what gets you through the day, or because some of these cruises are long, they're like 22 days of 12 hours on every day, is the people that you go with. I've cruised with people where the camaraderie wasn't necessarily there. And then cruises with when it is there, it's a lot of jokes, it's a lot of stories. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's the people that you go with, I think. It kind of formed this little family on each cruise. And by the end, you're like, oh, what do I do now? Because everyone goes their separate ways, right? So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Dirk calls me at night after cruises for the first week. He's really gets really lonely. He misses me a lot. So
he doesn't answer.
He calls me. No, I don't.
He doesn't answer. No, I've had enough with Dirk. That's enough.
You've got all the voicemails.
Voicemail full. Voice inbox.
Just check it in.
And speaking of which, you talk about missing each other after. How long, are these trips? I know they vary, but what's the average length of a trip at sea when you're going out for? And I don't even know if this is what you call it, but like regular maintenance. Is that what these trips are usually for? Is regular maintenance, making sure that everything is working there, making if you have to switch out some instrumentation, things like. How long are those? Typically those trips? And we can have Megan. You can answer that if you want.
Sure,
okay.
Sure. So,
sorry.
For Ocean Networks Canada, we typically have at least 2 regular maintenance trips per year. One is really focused more on inshore, and one is focused more on offshore. The inshore one is typically a week, a little bit more than a week. The offshore one is typically 2 to 3 weeks long.
Okay.
And when we say 2 to 3 weeks, usually it's people are working 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
7 days a week. Like it doesn't matter if it's a holiday. We don't get weekends. It's a grind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when we say 12-hour shifts, like you're on your shift for 12 hours, but typically you're up, you're doing some prep work, you're doing some post-shift work as well. So it's intense for sure.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you want to make sure that when you're out there, everything works, and we've talked about this already. If something doesn't work, you have to be on it to make it work as fast as you can, because you only have a certain amount of time out at sea anyway. And if you're only having 1 or 2 trips, then it can be really difficult. You don't want to miss out on something, or you don't, God forbid, you don't have to go back out for one specific thing if you couldn't get it done in the first trip. But I kind of got ahead of myself in terms of what goes into the planning of these trips. Like how far into planning do you guys get? How many, does that take months to get things done? What is it? What goes into that? And I guess we can talk to who wants to take that one. We'll take Megan. Do you want to talk about that? Or Josh?
That's all right. I can talk to speak to the ROV planning, obviously.
Yeah.
So, I like to consider the cruises almost they're almost like a movie production, in that there is a ton of prep and planning that takes place, and then it all has to get done in a short window. Everybody works 24/7, and then you're kind of done and you wrap it up, and it's so planning is in my opinion, it's the most important part of any cruise, because if you don't plan it right, obviously you go offshore
Right.
and you waste all this time and money. So from the ROV side of things, we like to meet with, whoever we're working with, Ocean Networks Canada, a couple months before a job, make sure that, and then every couple weeks after that, and then closer together, to make sure we have deck plans for the ship all worked out, all of our operations that we need special equipment for. We have the equipment, either rented or purchased and on the way and installed. And there's at least on our end, there's 1 to 2 months of prep work depending on the specific expedition. I think, Megan, you guys have a bit more probably.
Yeah, so we start months and months in advance, and really the planning starts with what's broken, and figuring out what's broken and what needs to be replaced and what needs maintenance, or like where are we expanding, and from there, and we get, it's a real team effort. So all the teams at Ocean Networks Canada and some of our stakeholders and science partners get involved and make requests. So it starts with that. And from there, we're procuring instruments, testing them, validating them, making sure that the data quality is right, building them up. Sometimes they have to be built onto platforms. Sometimes the platform needs to be designed first. So there's a lot of that prep work that goes into it. And then, so that's sort of on the instrument side, and like, what are we going to do? And sort of based on what our plan is, we have to procure sometimes a ship and an ROV. And so, we have to know what our requirements are for those ships and ROVs based on the work that we're trying to get done. We have to submit our permits and make sure that all of that is above board. And then as we're getting a little bit closer, as Josh mentioned, we work directly with the ROV provider to really get into the nuts and bolts of like integrating sensors or specialized equipment into the ROV for every dive that we do. So every time we go in the water with the ROV, we call it a dive. At a particular site, we have very detailed dive plans written. They're usually written in advance, but they're usually tweaked like the day before a dive with input from the ROV pilots and the people on board. So there's a lot that goes into it.
I would imagine too, like it's constantly changing because based on weather would pretty significant in terms of how that can change your plans quite quickly, whether you even go out or whether you even deploy an ROV or that type of work, right?
Yeah, we're fortunate where we have a number of different sites that we can go to, and typically most of our sites are part of our expedition plan, but all three of us are glued to Windy pretty much all the time, looking at the forecasts, looking at the wave heights, the wind at each of our locations, and looking a few days in advance of like, okay, well, what makes the most sense, and does it make sense to run away from the weather here to go somewhere else, to get a good weather window, or is it going to turn there just as we arrive? Like all those real time decisions. And then we work closely with the captains too, obviously.
Of course.
And Megan's leaving out really the important part of the planning, especially on board. She brings along a very large whiteboard every time on these cruises.
My dream board.
She calls it her dream board, and she writes down all of the possibilities every day of what we could do based on weather and everything that's gone on. Right. And then about 36 times a day, she goes to the dream board and changes what's on it. And so
it's like a vision board, right? It's like when people plan, like they do their vision board. This is your vision for the trip.
Yeah. I have it labeled on the top, ONC dream board.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, going once you've done all the planning, now you're steaming out. Does ONC have their own ships, or do you contract them out?
Dirk, you want to take that one?
Dirk, why don't you take that one? Yeah.
So we contract the ships. And those could be, job specific. So a lot of times there's a certain requirement for cranes or ship size or something like this. On our inshore expeditions, we could get away with some smaller vessels, and offshore, of course, we need the bigger vessels. And that's a combination of a lot of times we use Coast Guard vessels. There's some partnership there, and then also we've used Josh's their company, Campac. We used their ship before. There's a few different options that we can use. So
Okay.
it's a combination. It's all contracted though. We
Yeah, it's all
do own our
contracted.
own little like aluminum little smaller workboat, and we do
Yeah.
smaller operations with that where we do small coastal observatories, but not
Okay.
offshore.
Now, will that little boat come on to some of the bigger boats to do some little expeditions? I know some research vessels do that.
No, it does not.
Yeah.
No,
Okay. Makes sense. You're in the
it's very
pretty big
local. Yeah.
ocean. Yeah, for the little boat. Yeah. Now, how long does it take, like, for the offshore sites? Obviously, the inshore sites probably doesn't take as long, but for the offshore sites, to say your furthest site that you would go, how long would that take to get there, Dirk?
It takes about when you leave the dock here at IS, it takes about 27 hours of steaming to get there.
Okay, so
So yeah, it takes
quite far
quite a
out.
while to get there. Yeah.
Uh, to our furthest site. So
Or
that's our
further
Endeavour
side. Yeah, yeah.
site. But
Yeah.
we when we're doing our planning, we try and maximize our daylight hours and our dive windows to get to a site so that
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's typical, like when we plan our cruise in advance, we have an itinerary for, okay, we're planning on leaving at 1. ROV, are you going to be ready at 1 o'clock so we can leave, so you can be, Barkley Canyon at 8 in the morning for a first dive. And then you start creeping past 1, okay, so no point rushing to Barkley Canyon, let's go to Cascadia. Oh, no point rushing there, let's go to Endeavour, because you might want to, like Megan, maximize those days for diving.
Yeah, yeah, and like, there seems to be a lot of logistics in here. Have any of you gone through like logistics training? Because I don't know if that's necessarily taught in university when you go to university. Is this something you learn as you do more and more trips? Like, you just kind of learn on the go? Josh, you could talk about this because
I learned to hand it off to somebody else. That's what I learned.
it just seems like
I mean,
you have to anticipate a lot. You have to, like, and experience obviously matters, right? When you come into this.
absolutely. I mean, I always tell people, my job specifically as the director of operations is really to just try and think of everything that we need, write it down, and get people to either do it or get it or have it shipped. Just like any company, we have logistics personnel and things like that. So there is a ton always to think about, which is why we meet so often with clients and Ocean Networks Canada. But no training, absolutely, and you can tell that I have
Sometimes.
for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think you always have to, be patient in a way of, like, not everything goes right when you're at sea, right? A lot of things can go, not necessarily wrong, but divert because of weather or just something that you realize when you get there. I think that's that's what it really happens. And when you get that challenge, you kind of work through it, right? And as a team. And can you talk about maybe a time, Megan, that you've come to a site and things didn't necessarily go as planned right off the bat, like the weather kind of shifted? Like, what happens when like weather shifts as you get to a site? Is it more of a kind of wait, or do you just go to the next thing that you can do?
Yeah, it really depends on the conditions. So we've definitely, looked at the weather window and we get on site and the weather looks okay and we start a dive, say.
Yeah.
And we get partway through the dive and the weather's deteriorating. And with a lot of input from the ROV team and from the ship's captain, we say, okay, we have to cut this dive short. Like, we have to recover right away, because ultimately, when the ROV is being recovered, it's a huge robot coming up on a crane and people are having to navigate it on deck and secure everything on deck. And we have to do it in a safe way, right? So whatever the operation is, we're not going to we're not going to risk unsafe operations. So if the weather's deteriorating, if the captain makes a call, then the operation is done for the day and we recover the ROV.
Yeah.
and then we look at the forecast, and maybe it's blowing through very quickly, and we sit and wait, which we do sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe it's going to be really bad in that location for the next 3 days, and then we look at our other locations. On our a couple years ago, a really big storm was coming through, and it was going to impact all of our sites, and we actually ran away from the storm and hunkered down for over a day off the coast of Oregon, because that was the only place that we wouldn't get pummeled.
Right.
So it happens, and so when we're doing our planning, like we oversubscribe ourselves. So we plan to do more things than we could ever possibly get done, because maybe the weather's going to be great the whole time, and we could get nearly all of it done. Typically, we're down for a little bit during the weather. Sometimes when the weather is too bad to dive for safety reasons with the ROV, depending on the vessel that we have, sometimes we can spend some time mapping. So using a multi-beam mapping system. Yeah, exactly. And so just kind of mapping the gaps and collecting data just to be somewhat useful while we're waiting for the weather to settle down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, Josh, when you deployed the ROV, I've never been a part of that. I've never had the pleasure of being a part of that kind of excursion. Is the ROV tethered to the boat at all times? Like there's a cable that goes down that allows you to talk to the ROV in a way, in a sense?
Yes. I mean, it's kind of the definition of an ROV, remotely operated vehicle. They're always, to be designated as an ROV, you are tethered to a ship or to a vessel or a dock if you want. So there are autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, that are not, but they're used for a totally different purpose. And for Ocean Networks Canada, we need to be operating our manipulators, and we need to see the live feed of the cameras. So we need the tether, which is almost 7,000 meters long on a giant winch that's on board, and contains our power conductors and fiber optics to get the data up to the surface and down to the ROV. So yes, always tethered, which is always, it's the hardest thing to manage for ROV pilots. If you can manage your tether through all that water, especially when you're really deep, then you can work usually just fine. So it's a big part of ROV.
The tether's flexible though, right? It's just like it's cables. It's not like a metal. Is it a metal piece?
Well, there's multiple types. So we have several ROVs, and really the two different main types are soft tether and armored. So a soft tether would be wrapped in a rubber and be easily bendable. Is better for certain applications, but Ocean Networks Canada requires through frame lift of our vehicle. So we use our vehicle to attach to scientific platforms subsea. We actually land on them and latch into them, and then using our launch and recovery system and winch and our armored umbilical, which is very, very strong, we can pick up the ROV off the seafloor while we're latched into things that are thousands of pounds, and then we can bring them all the way up to the ship. So that's why we have an armored umbilical on our deep ROV, so that we can use it as basically a really deep crane almost to deploy and everything from the seafloor.
Okay, cool. So that's why all the currents that happen within the water column, however different they are as you go down deeper, that matters when it comes to these tethers and how the ROV is operated. Let's talk about when you get. I wanted to kind of hit on this ROV. When you guys are operating the ROV, you're in a little room, I assume, or a container, depending on the ROV on the ship. Is that and who's in the container when you do this? Obviously, Josh, you're probably in this operating it. Dirk, are you in it as well?
Yeah. So normally for every ROV ship, there'd be a ONC dive lead. And that would be either myself, it's normally me or Megan, or we have another person here, and we kind of rotate shifts as well. And we'll just go through the dive plan and kind of pivot as things aren't going to as expected anyway. So yeah, there'd be a senior person there every time from ONC.
Okay, and then that's where like that person's like, okay, this is what we want to accomplish on the dive. Let's see if we can find what we need to find and where we're going. And then Josh, your focus is more of just operating the ROV, making sure it's in a safe spot. And then there are arms on these ROVs, and you actually start to handle things.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because I don't know if my brain just doesn't fathom how difficult it must be to be able to operate these arms in like at depth. When you know, is clarity a problem sometimes? Like, can you talk a little bit about what happens when you get to the point of where you want to go and you have to start doing your maintenance or whatever the purpose of that dive is?
Sure, absolutely. Just first of all, as far as dive leads from Ocean Networks Canada, I have some that I like and some that I don't. I'll put that on the record. I'm not going to say who. World's best boss over there. Yeah, okay, so visibility is always tough. Certain sites that Ocean Networks Canada picks make me want to just I get so angry sometimes, Andrew. It's because when you can't see what's in front of you with the cameras and you're trying to do manipulations, it's very difficult. But we've been doing that for many years. I joke around that it doesn't make me angry. It's just a more difficult situation. But the science needs to be conducted in these areas specifically because of certain effects that make their turbidity so bad. So there's several instruments we can use, multi-beam sonars and acoustic cameras to kind of see through it, and we've been employing those and getting better and better at that over the years. And then as far as manipulations go, so we have two what we call 7 function spatially correspondent manipulators on the vehicle, one on each side at the front. And spatially correspondent means that we have a miniature version of the arm inside the control van, we call it.
Okay.
And for each arm, and a person sits there, and when they move that controller, the arm will move exactly as the controller is moved. So they hold it like this, and they move the controller around, and the arm will follow. And it's almost instant, and we need to have that ability. They're very advanced, expensive pieces of machinery and engineering, but we need them to do the delicate science, to do the operations that is required by Ocean Networks Canada. So it's a very, very fun part of the job, of course, but also, again, can be extremely stressful. If anybody watches, it takes about anywhere from 10 to 100 times longer to do something with those arms than it would for you to do something with your own arm on land. So it can be tough.
Well, and also you're in an environment that's very different. Obviously, it's the deep sea in many of these cases, and there are critters, as Megan likes to call them. There are critters in the deep sea. Have you ever had? Can you talk about some of the experiences that you've had where a critter comes in and is like just curious about what they see? They're probably like, "What is this? What is this critter? Like, what is going on here?" Do you get any kind of animals that come in and just kind of play around with the arms or try and touch the arms because they're curious?
So mostly the arms. What will and be curious about those? Always octopus. And it's always the coolest, best thing that we encounter. We will go to plug something in for Ocean Networks Canada, and there will be an octopus hiding, kind of using an instrument platform as its den. Nice. And sometimes they'll be basically right in the way. Yeah. And we don't want to, scare or hurt these animals. So we have to sort of gently use the manipulator and try it. And they usually at that point, then they'll reach out and they'll grab onto you. And obviously it's not dangerous to the ROV in any way, but it's extremely interesting and really fun. I mean, I joke around with my friends that I'm out fighting off octopus all the time, trying to get them out of our way. But
a lot of crabs too, Josh. A lot of crabs.
Yeah, crabs for sure.
Are sort of like coming into the frame of the camera, and
they move very slowly.
Yeah.
But they get see the arms come out.
They're brave.
They're like, okay, let's go.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm getting myself into, but I'm ready.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna pose this to all three of you. What's been the most interesting thing that's happened while deploying an ROV down at those depths while doing work down there? What's been the most interesting thing that's happened to, it could be individually or is it as a team when you're down there?
I think I could start. One of
The-
Go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, so one of the ones you don't expect is we have these instruments that are called benthic and resistivity sensors. Bars is what they look like, little tubes with wands. And you go to a hydrothermal vent, like the black smoke, or it's spewing out the hydrothermal fluid, and you put the wand inside there, and it measures temperature and resistivity of the fluid. But then you come back a year or two later, and the whole instrument is now part of the rock. Since the rock is just growing as it's being deposited, the rock's actually growing around it, and then there's no way to get it out. It's now part of it. So
does it
there's
still
been
work?
a situation where we can't actually remove it. It's been completely engulfed over the course of like.
Does the sensor still work at that time, or
no?
is it?
A lot of times it's completely melted, ruined.
Yeah,
not working.
Yeah,
but it's not so much that like there's also cool stuff that happens because the unique like situation of operating ROVs subsea. The ship is actually stationary for hours, sometimes 36 hours, because the ROV is there, and now you're offshore, sitting in the middle, plopped, basically, without moving. And when the weather gets really thick, or what they call socked in, all the lights from the ship is kind of contained within that bubble on the surface. Yeah. Now, over the course of the night, since nothing's moving, you get the bait fish, you get all the bait, you get everything coming, and then it becomes a feeding frenzy. So you've got, I don't know, we've seen one night you could see millions, uncountable amount of fish, but then also sunfish and sharks and dolphins, all night swarming around the vessel. It's pretty cool. And I don't think you get that unless you're getting the ROV down below as well for that long.
Right.
That's kind of a cool thing, yeah.
That's amazing. That's pretty cool. Megan, did you have a different story that's happened to you where that's really memorable?
Well, I'll tell a couple. So one of our sites is the Endeavour hydrothermal vents that Dirk was talking about a little bit. And I remember kind of like one of my first cruises going there, and I didn't really know that much about them, but the ROV goes down and it's kind of like you're on a different planet. Right. So there's all these hydrothermal vents that look like spires, and there's like what looks like black smoke coming out of them, and it's kind of shocking. and the fact that the ROV can like navigate around these vent structures, because you might turn a corner, and then because you don't have the same sort of spatial awareness that you do as a human with like peripheral vision, and necessarily like you'll turn the corner, and then in the frame there'll be this huge hydrothermal vent tower, like whoa. It's pretty magical, and kind of shocking, because you're floating on the ship above it, and you're like, whoa, it's like this sci-fi universe just straight down below where we're sitting right now. It's pretty epic. And then I'll tell one other thing. So
yeah, for sure.
We were on an expedition this past June, and we'd finished all of our dives, and we had a couple of hours before we had to leave to be back to the dock in time. And it was lunchtime, and everybody was kind of sitting outside eating lunch, and these humpback whales just were playing in front of the ship for. That's awesome. And we didn't have to leave yet, and nobody was on shift anymore. Right. So it was this epic, whale watching situation, and we could just sit there for an hour, and the whole crew was outside.
I would
just
imagine
running from one side of the vessel to the other as we were watching these humpbacks playing.
How many were they?
I want to say it got up to 5.
Wow.
Do you remember that right, Dirk?
Yeah, there's a few groups that travel through during the dive, and at the end they were kind of the last stragglers are kind of just playing. We eventually think they were playing in the bow thruster as the ship's holding station. They were just like getting that blow of the thruster, right?
It was a pretty magical way to finish an expedition.
Yeah, I mean it's really great when you almost have your your environmental documentary right in front of you.
Yeah.
Where you just see the beautiful scenery, the ocean in the background, the horizon, and then you've got whales just playing in front of your ship, and you're off, and that's probably the best way to kind of end your shift, I think.
Yeah, and there's definitely, you talk about some days where you're like, there's not enough money in the world that you can pay me to keep doing this, especially if you're seasick and it's rough and it's just And then on the flip side, there's days where you're like, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this right now. This is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I want to just talk a little bit about the challenges that we have, like out at sea. Obviously, like we've talked about, nothing works perfectly. It can be very hectic. Josh, for the ROV, what are the biggest challenges? Obviously, visibility is one we've kind of touched upon in a bit of the currents. Is there anything else that becomes a challenge, or is you just got an easy job? It's that easy.
I actually don't really do anything. It's just the robot goes in.
It's very true. It's very true.
Really easy. I can do it
into that one, Josh.
Really. Yeah.
Yeah, Josh mostly just calls it in.
Yeah. I don't actually come out of my bunk. Well, so it's the most dynamic environment to work in that we know of currently in the universe. And the reason I say that is because, yes, we can get to space, but when you're in space, you have a one atmosphere. It's a vacuum, but that's it. It doesn't change where you go in space, say.
Right.
But if you go in the deep ocean, every meter deeper that you put your ROV into the ocean, the water pressure increases because of the weight of the water above you, of course. So the biggest challenge in ROVs in general is especially when you're going really deep, 2,000-3,000 meters, is making sure that all your systems are built properly and maintained properly, so that water doesn't creep into anywhere you don't want it to. I mean, it's a very highly advanced piece of robotics that you're throwing into salt water under pressure that's changing all the time. So that's that's problem number one. Now that's more or less been solved over the years of ROV engineering, but then the dynamics of the job, the other dynamics is obviously the weather. So the ship, if it has problems in the weather, holding station, or can make launch and recovery dangerous if you do it in too high a seas. So that's another issue that we face commonly. And then visibility, like we mentioned, that can be one. Sometimes we have great visibility, especially at the deeper sites, so that's not an issue. Current, though. Ocean currents can be a very large issue. We have a cruise in March coming up where we'll be doing some work where the currents can be really, really just terrible to work in. For example, we've launched an ROV once, and of course we know what the surface current is doing from just looking over the side of the ship. So we put the ROV in and we face the ship so that the ROV will get swept by the current away from the ship to a safe spot. But once we dove 10 meters down, the current was going a complete opposite direction, and we could not tell that. We didn't have instrumentation to know. So the ROV went 10 meters down, and we're diving, and all of a sudden it starts getting pushed directly underneath the ship, which is very dangerous.
Yeah.
So, that can be one for sure.
Yeah, definitely a change. I mean, there's a lot of... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, I was going to say, Josh, you can tell Andrew about your very highly sophisticated surface current check before launching.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Megan. Well,
you're welcome.
So I have a very advanced instrument. I go over to the side of the ship and I spit into the water, and I watch the spit and see how fast and which direction it goes.
Very scientific.
And and it usually works pretty well.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Now, I want to kind of bring up. There's a story that I've heard about an ROV deciding to go on its own trip at one point. In a way, it's a bit of one of your scientific studies, I guess, of finding out currents and where they go. Can you talk a little bit about, Josh, where an ROV ended up off the coast of Oregon?
Sure, absolutely, no problem. This is my story of what I like to say is the longest ROV dive ever because it was in the water for 2 weeks straight.
Right.
We were installing an outfall pipe, which is a pipe that comes from a sewage treatment plant in Victoria and then disperses treated sewage in deep into the ocean, properly. We were installing a new one a few years ago, and as pretty much every time we've had a major issue, there was multiple factors involved. But basically, our ROV became the tether became trapped due to a few different things. The weather came up, and it became trapped subsea. So we had to cut the tether manually on the ship and leave the ROV stuck subsea overnight because we couldn't stay where we were with the ship. But when we came back in the morning, the ROV was no longer stuck, and they're designed to float when they are not being powered, so that you can find them. And we came back in the morning. It was nowhere to be found. I spent about 4 days in a small airplane searching the ocean around that area. We didn't see it. It's got a
Basically
big
a
yellow
needle in a
top.
haystack. Is that
Yeah,
the term?
absolutely. And I guess we weren't really looking in the right spot because evidently it had floated all the way down to the coast of Oregon from Victoria. I don't know how many kilometers that is, and we literally had lost ROV flyers and posters out in Victoria, like if found, please return to or please call. And we put out notices to the Coast Guard, and somebody eventually found it in the U.S. waters, and we got it back. And we got it working within 4 hours of being returned to us, to our facility. So that was pretty cool.
I think before we recorded, I think Megan said it's probably a good scientific drifting study. I think is what we.
That's a very expensive way to understand current versus Josh's spit test.
Exactly. We'll stick with the spit test from now on. I think
he's got the extremes covered.
Yeah.
It was pretty rough at the time, but
I can imagine.
now we can laugh.
A little stressful
for sure.
Yeah.
It's also not the first ROV that I've lost, just for the longest amount of time.
Gotcha.
Definitely.
Gotcha. Dirk, one of the things I wanted to talk about too, just as we kind of wrap this up, is you're working in very deep waters. The pressure is almost like to the extreme. What type of materials do a lot of the instrumentations have to be able to survive in deep? I mean, we talked a little bit about if you put something in a hydrothermal vent, it can, the deposits can grow on top of it. But if we're looking at just like a platform and tubes that instruments go into, or like water that flows through, if it has to flow through, what kind of materials are we looking at here that you're working with?
So obviously the easiest material that's the least reactive is plastic. So if you can get away with plastic in whatever pressure, that's the ideal. But like Josh said, pressure, our deepest site is, I don't know, almost 3 kilometers, and the pressure down there is 4,500 pounds per square inch. So you can't get away with plastic if there's any kind of air void, right?
Yeah.
So mostly what we do use is titanium, because we don't want to have to recover an instrument or anything like this, because we're worried about the corrosion on the housing. So titanium is normally our go-to for absolutely everything that requires any kind of pressure vessel. We have used aluminum. It's much cheaper. It's easier to machine, but in general, titanium. We also use shallower water. We do use aluminum. Shallow water, we can get away with plastic, but it's not just pressure. We're also worried about corrosion. So, and that could be affected by not just salt water. Like in Strait of Georgia, we get crazy corrosion on like stainless steel or anything like this, and we don't it's just some other chemical or interaction in the water.
Right.
Some of the more dormant, but I guess less interesting sites like the abyssal plains, the things just seem to last. And at the hydrothermal vents, there's some other weird reaction that interferes with the material's ability to protect itself. So, but titanium generally is good for any of those environments.
Gotcha. Wonderful. And I know it's sometimes for a lot of us, it's difficult to picture what's under there. And you guys have done a really great job of putting together a story map website where people can click onto, and we'll put the links in the show notes. Can we talk about, why this is such an important aspect, Megan, to have these types of story maps up to kind of give people a perspective of what it's like what the instrumentation looks like, what it's like to operate an ROV. I'm looking right now at an ROV arm that's trying to grab a rope. How important is that for ONC to get that information out there, and for Campac to do that too?
Sure. First, a shout out to the ONC comms team, who actually puts a lot of work into the story maps. I don't know that us as engineers and technologists are the best storytellers all the time, but working closely with our comms team to put these stories together in compelling ways so that anyone can understand what we're talking about, and to really tell the story for any ages, kindergarten to, seniors, with any kind of background. And it's really, if you think about the planet Earth, we're actually mostly ocean. And, other than the surface of the ocean, most people don't get a chance to see what's underneath and to understand how important the ocean is to the health of the planet, and to our industries, to our, food supplies. The list goes on. And so kind of opening up that window so that there's better understanding of what goes on in the deep ocean, the interactions in the deep ocean, just for overall awareness, and really sort of, opening the door and, sort of opening people's minds, and kind of maybe inspiring a few kids to join us on these offshore expeditions in future. So it's super important to get out there and to tell the stories, and to make it accessible for as many people as possible.
Absolutely. My final question: you guys are preparing to go out in offshore soon, in the next month, I believe. Is this going to be a regular maintenance plan, or is this going to be anything different? We'll go Dirk with this one.
Yeah. So this is we generally have two. This will, I guess. Long story short, yes, it's regular maintenance. We have normally 2 expeditions a year, and normally we focus the early season one on inshore, nearshore activities, and then the summer one on offshore. And that's kind of a combination between the inshore, trying to get ahead of the freshet, which when we get all the more nutrients in the water and we get algal blooms, and visibility kind of goes away. So we try and get our instruments freshly prepped for that, to capture all that data. Gotcha. And then offshore, we want to maximize weather, so we try to go in the best weather months. So that's always in the summer.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I have to say, the three of you, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about the work that you do. Obviously, it's invaluable to the operations of ONC, and it was super fun to have all three of you on. And it's great to see, the way you guys banter back and forth. And obviously, you've known each other for a long time, spent a lot of time at sea together, and I think it's a lot of fun to be able to have that on the episode too. So I really appreciate all three of you coming on and for the work you do. And good luck with the next trip. And I'd love to have you back on the show at some point.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you, Megan, Josh, and Dirk, for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. And this segment, Surfacing Secrets, Explore the Ocean and Know the Planet. This is such an important thing for me to partner with Ocean Networks Canada, as well as their partners, to just kind of give the behind the scenes of what goes on. We hear a lot about the deep sea. We hear a lot about the work that goes on, but we don't get the intricacies of it. We don't understand who are the players, who are the scientists, the data engineers, the IT people. We don't get to hear from them, and they are amazing people, as you can tell. The chemistry between all three of the people that we had on today, Megan, Josh, and Dirk, were fun. You can tell that they have a lot of fun out there at sea and in the field, because it's hard. It's not easy. It's long days, long nights at times. It's very intense to work out at sea. You're never going to have a perfect day to work out at sea when you're looking at, wave actions and weather and so forth. So it's really good to be able to everybody get along. And you can just see that right now. The camaraderie between the three guests that we had on today, it was amazing. It was fun. And you get to see how much fun they have at sea as well as here on the podcast. So it's great to see that. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to go to the ONC's website, Ocean Networks Canada's website. I'll put it in the show notes in the description below, depending on how you're consuming this podcast. But I'd love to hear your questions for the podcast. If you want to let me know in the comments on YouTube, or if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, you can go to our website, speakupforblue.com/contact. Let me know if you have any questions about ONC, or if you have any comments about the episodes, if you enjoy them. If you don't, let me know. I want to hear your feedback. Let me hear it from you. And I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North, Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time.